This is a Veterans History Project interview with Mr. John B. Kelly. Today's date is October 9th, 2005. Mr. Kelly, would you state your name and date of birth?
Well, my formal name is John B. Kelly, but I'm known as Jack Kelly. And I was born on November 4th, 1922.
Where were you born?
Philadelphia.
Where did you go to high school?
West Catholic High School for Boys.
When did you graduate?
1940.
What did you do following graduation from high school?
Well, I went to work in an office. I had a commercial course in high school, and I moved right into office work.
Where were you on December 7th, 1941?
Well, I was out with a friend of mine. Beautiful day. We were out for a long walk, and life was pretty good at that time. Until sometime in the afternoon, someone shouted from a car in our direction that the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, and then the whole world changed.
What happened to you in the months following the attack on Pearl Harbor? What did you do?
Well, I could tell you exactly what happened the day after Pearl Harbor. I was working for the Immigration Service in the Custom House in Philadelphia, and I went to work on Monday morning, and I could barely get into the building. There was a mob scene. There were people all over the place. It was like a crowd coming out of Veterans Stadium after a football game. And I couldn't figure out what had happened, except I knew that the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor the day before. But it turned out that the recruiting offices for the Navy and the Army and the Marine Corps, they were all in this building. And you had a mob scene down there on Monday morning. This crowd came down to join the service. It was amazing. I really had a hard time getting in the building to go to work.
The weeks that followed and the months that followed, did you continue to work for the Immigration Service?
Yeah, I continued to work and trying to figure out what was in our future. In those days, the draft age was 20, and I had just turned 19, so I had about a year to figure out what I might be doing, and I wanted to get in the Air Force. I had this idea that it would be great to be a pilot, and so they had lowered the requirements at that point, so that up to that point you had to be a college graduate to get in that program, but then they lowered the requirements, so if you were a high school graduate you could qualify. And I tried my best to get in the Air Force. There was quite a lengthy IQ, an all-day IQ exam, and then a pretty tough physical. The physical was much tougher than the others, and at that point I got washed out. I'm still a skinny guy, but I was a skinny kid then, and I didn't meet their qualifications, and I washed out. And I got a little bit embittered by that, and I decided, well, since they won't take me for what I wanted to do, I'll just wait until I'm drafted. And that's exactly what happened. You know, within 6 months I became a draft age, and I went in shortly after that.
How did you learn you were drafted?
Well, that's a funny story too, because you had to sign up for the draft. This was way in advance. I think when you reached a certain age, maybe it was 18, you had to sign up, and I did. And then they were drafting people as soon as they became 20. And lo and behold, who got drafted but my father? Because I was John B. Kelly Jr., but I didn't use the junior. And so a notice came in the mail, and my father was being drafted. Well, you know, it caused a little shakeup, and we had to go through some ramifications to get that straightened out. That finally put me on the list as Junior, John B. Kelly Jr.
how shortly after you received your draft notice, what did you do after you straightened that out? Where did you go?
Well, there was a draft board in the neighborhood, and it consisted of, I don't know, 3 or 4 local people that were in that district, and they would interview you and they would check you out, and then eventually I got a notice to go in for a physical. By this time I knew what to expect because I had been in there for the Air Force physical before that, but this physical wasn't quite as demanding. I think that they would have taken pretty nearly everyone at this point.
About what time of year was that? That was when?
That was January 15th, 1943, and they swore you in the same day, but they put you in some kind of a reserve unit for 2 weeks. They let you go home so you could straighten out your personal matters, and then you had to report back. I think it was 10 days later. Report back at the Armory down 32nd and Market Street, just north of Market Street. And then you joined the crowd there, and they put you on a train, sent you off to Indiantown Gap. I forget what they called that center, but
January 15th, 1943. So you straightened out. This was your reporting date for the draft.
The reporting date was January 15th, but then if you were sworn in, they put you in some kind of a reserve status for 10 days.
For 10 days.
To give you an opportunity to straighten out your personal affairs.
What do you recall the feeling at home during those 10 days? What do you recall back in that time?
Well, it was it was just a matter-of-fact situation. You knew you were going in. Everybody was going in the service. It was just a natural thing. If you were of the proper age and you were in reasonable health, you expected to go, and you were. The only question was whether you're going to go in the Army or whether you were going to join the Navy or the Marines or whatever. But it was just as a matter of fact, this is it. This is what's going to happen.
After the 2 weeks, you went to Indiantown Gap. Fort Indiantown Gap?
Yes.
Yes. How did you get there?
I think that they put you on a train. See, the Armory that I went to was down at 32nd and Market, and I think they just paraded us over to the train station, put us on a train, and got off at Indiantown Gap.
What was the train? A troop train?
I don't recall, but all I remember that it was loaded with recruits, so I assumed that it was.
What happened when you got to Indiantown Gap?
Well, life changed very fast. Very fast. All kinds of people that had been there 3 or 4 days ahead of you are now yelling at you, "You'll be sorry! You'll be sorry!" But life did change very quickly. You went through all kinds of medical situations, getting all kinds of shots. They issued your clothing. They took your clothing, and you balled them up and put them in some kind of a, I think it was a big paper bag, and you addressed it for home, and they took care of putting it in at the post office. But now you found yourself in a whole new life, living in the barracks with all GI clothing and the whole shebang. And they kept you busy for 3 days, about 3 days. And then fellows were getting shipped out to various parts. Nobody knew where they were going. You just got a notification. Your name was on the board. Report to such and such a place. And everybody, in our case, it was a train. A whole bunch of us boarded a train. And if the train started to go east, everybody cheered because we figured we weren't going too far from home. If it headed west, we never knew where we were going because it could be anywhere in the United States. As it turned out, the train kept shifting back and forth between east and west for quite a long while before it finally headed west. And about a day and a half later, we ended up in a place called Camp Tyson, Tennessee.
Could you spell that for me?
Tyson.
And before we talk about Camp Tyson, Tennessee, just take me back for a minute. When you were drafted, did it specifically point you to the service you were going to go into?
No.
And how is
Well,
it?
everyone was getting drafted for the Army. There were no other services involved at that time in the draft status.
It was the Army's draft?
Yes.
Okay. And you recall at Fort Indiantown Gap, how many days were you there?
3 days.
Just 3. And then at that point, you were put on another train, and you were ordered specifically, there was a decision made about where you were going to go, but you didn't know.
No one on the train knew where we were going.
Mm-hmm. And what was the train like? Was it an all-troop train?
It was an old troop train.
What were your quarters like? How long were you on the train?
We were on the train about a day and a half, and it was pretty bad. I think they dug this train up. It had been on on the sidings for about 55 years or so, because the railroads were using every piece of equipment they could possibly get. And this was in January, late January, 43, and there was no heat on the train at all. And it was very uncomfortable. It had wooden seats, as I recall. And it was not nice. It was not nice at all.
Just sleep on the seats itself? Is that what you had
Oh,
to
yeah,
do?
yeah. Yeah, and I remember freezing that night. It was a cold night.
Yeah.
The first introduction, yeah.
Did they let you off the train for anything to get
No.
in? No?
No.
Okay. The Camp Tyson, Tennessee, where is that?
It's in western Tennessee, about 50 miles, as I recall, 50 miles north of Memphis. Approximately 50 miles north. Near the town, closest town is Paris, Tennessee.
What happened at Camp Tyson when you arrived there? What was that like?
Big surprise. Big surprise. I found myself in a barrage balloon battalion. Barrage balloons, can you imagine that? And it was a part of the Coast Artillery.
How did you learn that you were going to be in a barrage balloon battalion?
Well, as soon as we arrived in the middle of the night sometime, like 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's when we were told where we were. And this was the barrage balloon training something or other. But it was all barrage balloons.
This was all at Camp Tyson. This is what the training was all about.
That's what it was all about. And they were forming a new battalion. And that's why this whole crew came from Indiantown Gap. They were going to start basic training, and the entire battalion was formed out of this group that came from Indiantown Gap.
How long were you at Camp Tyson?
I think up until about sometime in May. I basically started. Oh, I started in Camp Tyson. They put me in the medical unit for some strange reason. And there was a doctor in charge, about 10 or 12 of us. And it wasn't my cup of tea. And the doctor, recognizing the fact that some people wouldn't be happy with that, he gave us an opportunity to get out of that medical unit and to get into a regular unit. So that's what I opted for. Whether it was the right decision or not, I'll never be able to tell you that, but that's the way it worked. So I got back into the regular group, going through regular basic training.
So this was also going to be basic training for you,
yes,
as well as...
But it didn't work out that way exactly, because I went through a certain amount of basic training. I don't recall how long, some weeks, and then because I could type and I could take shorthand, they grabbed me they pulled me out of basic training. They were having a big investigation about a bunch of fires at the camp, and they were holding a hearing, and they wanted a court stenographer And they assumed that I was a court stenographer because I could take shorthand. And so they put me in, and I told them that being able to take stenography and being a court stenographer are two different things. And they said, well, that's tough luck, Kelly. You're our court stenographer. You're it. So that's what I did for another couple of weeks. And then after that tour was over, I went back into the basic training unit only for about another week, and then I get pulled out, and they made me the assistant to the intelligence officer for the camp over in headquarters. They called it G2 at the time, as I recall.
What are your days like at Camp Tyson? What time is, I guess, reveille you call it? What time are they? Where are you staying?
Well, we lived in the regular two-story army barracks, and I couldn't tell you what time of the morning it was. It was maybe 5:30. At the latest, it was 6 o'clock, but it was probably 5:30. All the overhead lights would be thrown on, and so somebody would blow a whistle and get your fanny out of bed and get out there, and you had about 10 minutes at most to get up and get dressed and get outside on the street for roll call. And as I recall, it was always very cold. It was very cold and very dark. They used to have to take the roll call with a flashlight. They have a flashlight reading the names and make sure everybody was there and everybody was in place.
What's your rank at this time?
Private. No one was anything higher than a private.
When you came out, the folks that were getting it, were they drill sergeants? Were they, what were they?
Yes, they were experienced Army people that had been around for some time, and now they got themselves promoted into this unit, both for training for us, and training, I guess, for themselves for the barrage balloon business.
Barrage balloons.
Our captain, who was in charge of our company, he was an old cavalryman. He had been in the Army for years and years and years riding horses. And they got rid of the horses about this time, and that's how he ended up in the barrage balloon battalion, because that was something new.
You're going through basic training for a few weeks when the word leaks out that they needed the court stenographer, more or less?
Yes.
Is that? Now, was there anything remarkable about your basic training during those 2 weeks? What did you do during that time?
Well, you did everything you were told to do, and that means you never knew what was coming up next. But we spent a lot of time in close order drill, and a lot of time on marches, cross-country marches.
Describe close order drill.
Well, basically when you got up in the morning and you got out for roll call, you just didn't lounge around out there. You had to get in line, and you had to line up in a fashion that was orderly. And close order drill meant that you had a line. The lines had to be straight in front of you, and on both sides of you, and everybody was a certain distance apart, and then you had to count off your spot, and everything was done by the numbers. The count off was from 1 to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right down the line, and they got everything had to be straightened out all the time, unless you were told to relax. You were either at attention or you were at I forget what the term was. At ease, if you were at ease. At ease meant you just spread your legs apart a little bit for comfort and put your hands behind your back, but you were still, it was semi-attention, but it was at ease.
How about the marches? What were they like?
The marches were just cross-country, and they were in what they called route step. That meant that you could walk along at your own pace, not your own speed, but your own pace. You didn't have to march in a count-off situation, just march like you would normally walk, but you had to walk, and these marches were quite long, and unfortunately I never had the right size shoes on, and like everyone else, you get blisters, terrible blisters on your feet. It was pretty bad.
What did they do to treat the blisters?
Not an awful lot. They didn't do very much. You just suffered through most of it.
How far were the marches, do you remember?
Well, the longest I think we were on was 20 miles.
Were you marching with a rifle?
No. 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 We didn't have equipment yet.
Had you ever marched that far before or walked that far before in your life?
No. No. There were fellows that didn't like to eat breakfast. There are always some people that don't particularly care for breakfast. And after we got out on a march and we were we were out maybe 10 miles or so, they were all dying. They were dying because they didn't have anything to eat. They were absolutely dying. And so from that point on, either because they didn't have anything to eat, they were absolutely dying. And so from that point on, either they would eat breakfast, or they would carry a lot of candy bars with them to keep them going. But if you don't eat breakfast and you have a heavy schedule, it's hard to get by 9 o'clock. By that time, you're ready to pass out. You're so hungry.
The marches would take place early in the day then. Off you go.
Yeah, yeah.
And then how about in the afternoons? What do you recall about that during those first few weeks?
Well, we went through all kinds of military drills, how to use how to read a map and how to use a compass. And the scariest thing, the thing that made you really realize that you were, this wasn't fun, this was not fun and games, was a bayonet drill, where you had a bayonet on the end of your rifle and you had to learn how to use it. They had straw dummies set up, and you had to learn how to use the butt of the rifle and the bayonet, and you began to think this is pretty serious business now. It sober you up pretty fast.
Did they take you out on the, I guess, the rifle range?
Yes, I was out on the rifle range a few times, and I got what you'd call an average score. That was a marksman score. I wasn't particularly good with it, but good enough to pass the requirements.
What kind of rifle did you use?
The M1, I think it was, they called it, the M1 Garand. It was a relatively new rifle about that time, but it was the latest. It was a good rifle. We weren't issued these rifles at all. We didn't have a rifle as such for ourselves. This was, you got the rifle when you were out on the rifle range to use it at that time, and then you passed it on to the next guy.
So you didn't formally have a weapon of your own during that basic training time, right?
No.
The move over to the court stenography, how long did that take? Do you remember how many?
Oh, that was a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I got back on basic training, I never did finish the basic training. See, I missed the beginning for about 10 days. I was in the medics, and then I was a court stenographer, and I missed a couple of weeks. And then before it was over, I missed a couple of weeks because they told me to report to this the camp intelligence officer, and I was working in the office for him.
How long was that assignment for?
Well, I only lasted in there about I'd say 6 weeks, and then I was told to report for an exam of some kind, an IQ exam, and I had no idea what that was all about until I got there, and I found out that there was something called the ASTP, the Army Specialized Training Program, and this test was in conjunction with the ASTP program, and it lasted all day long, and I wasn't enthusiastic one way or another about it. But it was shortly after that, then I got another notice that I was to report. I lost my job with the intelligence officer because I was supposed to report with a gang to go to the University of Alabama in conjunction with this ASTP program.
Okay.
And that University of Alabama lasted about a month, and that was a series of tests and military routines. marching and close order drills and things. And then from that point, I got assigned to the University of Mississippi, to the formal part of the ASTP program. It was a basic engineering course.
So you're at Camp Tyson.
From Camp Tyson, I went to University of Alabama.
What time of year? It's 1943.
1943 in about May.
And you were there for about a month?
At University of Alabama, yes.
How many others went with you?
There were about 6 from Camp Tyson that went.
How'd you get there?
Took a train, as I recall, but I'm not particularly sure. I remember getting into Memphis. I think it was we took a train to Memphis. Then we had to change trains, and we went. We did take a train to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That's where the University of Alabama is. And I remember now it was a train because they'd lost our luggage. And we had cold weather uniforms on. And the weather started to get very hot down in Alabama. And it must have been late May. And we had to suffer in those heavy clothes for about 5 days before they found our luggage. We were headed for Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the luggage ended up in Tuskegee, Alabama. Before they found it.
When you got to the Immersive Alabama, was it all military folks that you were in this class with, this course?
Yes. We were the first group of this ASTP program that arrived there, and shortly thereafter more and more and more came in, more Army troops. Until before I left there, before the month was over, it seemed like there were hundreds of troops there as a staging area for this ASTP program.
At Alabama, where did you stay?
They had kind of, I guess you'd call them cottages, one-story wooden buildings that were really, like a large cottage, but it turned out to be barracks. And I don't think that these had been used in years and years and years. But they were opened up because we were coming in, and we spent the first couple of days we were there making them livable, doing a lot of cleaning and straightening out.
Did you have to follow the same daily routine up early? Were you on your own?
Well, it was different. It was different than being in a basic training camp because everyone there was a private. If you had been picked for this ASTP program and you were a sergeant or whatever, for submarine protection. And if you had to get up in the middle of the night, say to go to the bathroom or something, you find yourself stepping over hundreds and hundreds of bodies trying to navigate your way through this crowd of people up on the deck in order to get inside. But that was the best place to be. If you could find a spot, and it was kind of hard to find a spot because there were like 8,000 people aboard this ship. We have a fellow here where I live. He was in the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard ran those ships, and he was on a ship just like the one I was on. He was on a companion ship to it, one of the other general ships, and so he knows exactly what it was like. But we had colored tickets in order to eat. Like they'd call out the people with yellow tickets, or the people with red tickets up on the deck. And when you got up on the deck, you had to get in line, and the lines went all the way around the ship. And maybe they'd go around the ship twice before you got an opportunity to go inside to start your passageway down to 3 or 4 levels down into where the mess hall was. And so that's all you did. And it was so crowded on the ship that you really couldn't find a place to lounge, hang around. You had to keep moving. They kept everybody moving all the time, just to keep circulation, I guess, going. But it was that crowded.
Did you have to wear a life vest the whole time?
Yes, always wore. We had it was one of those rubberized things you could put around your waist, and it had a couple of cartridges in there, CO2 cartridges or whatever, some kind of gas. And theoretically, when you put the thing on, if you wanted it to inflate, you'd hit this thing real hard, and the gas would fill up the life belt. But those life belts had been used by many people before we used them, and we had strong suspicions that half of them wouldn't even work. And they were made out of a rubberized material, and they were so worn out looking, like we thought that they were all full of holes. There was no way to test them either.
You just had to do the best you could.
Did the best you could.
Is what you had.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall that your ship going in any strange patterns to get over to?
Well, it was just zigzagging all the time, but it was always heading. It was always heading south and west, and you could tell. By the way, we didn't stop anywhere until we got to New Guinea, Finschhaven, New Guinea, and you could tell when you got below the equator, because you started to read the stars at this point. And I never saw so many stars in all my life, and I haven't seen as many since as I was on the troop ships, because all the lights were out on the ship, and you're out there at night, and it was just dazzling. Never saw anything like that. I still haven't. The sky is just packed full of stars. So we began to read stars, passing the time, and when you could see the North Star, it began to disappear. It would be down lower and lower every night, and you knew you were going the opposite direction. And when the North Star disappeared, you were at the equator. Then it would be gone, and then you'd be guided by the Southern Cross when you got down below the equator. So that's kind of how we could tell where we were relative to the equator.
When you were up, how often did you sleep up on the top deck?
As often as I could, through rain, showers, and everything else.
Just better than being on the
better than being down below, yeah.
And would you have to stake a spot for yourself?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And then if you left the spot, you'd lose it, and you'd have to fight for another one.
How long was this journey on the ship?
Well, we went to Finschhaven, New Guinea. We didn't know that till after we had been there. We were there for a day or two out on the ship. And then here it turned out that there was hardly anyone left at Finschhaven, and so they kept us aboard the ship. While we were on that journey to Finschhaven, there was a convoy headed for Leyte in the Philippines for the invasion of Leyte. And so when we got to Finschhaven, they kept us aboard, and then they moved up to a place called Hollandia, New Guinea. And we stayed there for a little while, I don't know how long. And then we stayed there for a little while, I don't know how long. And then they kept us aboard until we went to Leyte in the Philippines. So I think we were aboard that troop ship altogether for 3 weeks.
3 weeks?
I think it was 3 weeks, yeah. And we got off the ship in the middle of the night, and in Leyte. And they took us on ducks. We had a scamper off this troop ship onto ducks, and the ducks took us into the beach at Leyte. Now the invasion had taken place several weeks before we arrived. I'm not sure exactly how many weeks. We didn't have access to all that information. But anyhow, the war was going on, was pretty active there. It wasn't on the beach though, it was inland in the mountain area just beyond where we were. When we ended up in a replacement depot once again in the middle of the night in Leyte, and a strange thing happened to us. Now this is the original gang that started back in Fort Monroe, Virginia. The 60 people, 56 enlisted men and the 4 officers who are in the Coast Artillery, and we all have training in radar. And we arrived in the middle of the night here with the war going on in the background, and we were sitting there for a couple of hours before the captain who ran this replacement depot came out to greet us. About 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, he came out to greet us. And he said, and I can't use any 4-letter words in this interview, I don't think, but he said, "I don't know what the bleep you guys are doing here. There isn't a Coast Artillery outfit in the entire South Pacific." Now, how do you figure these things out? Where was the Pentagon when they put us through all that training in the Coast Artillery equipment, sent us all the way across the country, sent us all the way to the South Pacific, and when we arrived, they say, there isn't a Coast Artillery in the entire South Pacific. So we didn't know what they were going to do with it. Oh, what he did say was, if you can hear the guns going on in the background up on the hills there. He said they're getting the bleep kicked out of them up there right now, whatever division was there. He said, and if that continues, that's where you guys are going to end up. So it was kind of a shock. I didn't think we'd be able to use our radar sets up there. So we were hoping that they would be successful up in the hills. But anyhow, we ended up in his replacement depot for 2 or 3 weeks. And they used our services by putting us down on the beach at night, unloading ducks in an ammunition depot down on the beach. So that's what we did every night. We were in like a labor battalion.
Where were you staying? What were your quarters like?
Well, we were lucky. We were in a tent, with these Army canvas folding cots. So we did have a cot. We were in a tent. So we were lucky. We didn't have to sleep outdoors.
It's about November, December time frame, 1944?
Yeah, November, I guess. November 44. And then one day they had us report once again, get bags packed, you're on your way, and this time they took us out to the airport. Well, but it wasn't an airport, it was an airstrip that had been taken from the Japanese, and they put us aboard a transport plane, and lo and behold, we were headed back to New Guinea by way of Peleliu in the Pacific. So we were on a transport, DC-3 transport plane, and we landed in Peleliu, which had been taken a month or so before that by the Marines. And we stopped there because they wouldn't dare fly at night. Some kind of a rule, again, anything in the air at night was an enemy and so forth. And so we stayed in Peleliu overnight, and we got back on the transport in the morning and flew to Hollandia, New Guinea, stayed there for a night, and then flew back to Finschhaven, where we first New Guinea place we spotted. We ended up back at Finschhaven in a replacement depot. This has gone on for some time.
The New Guinea, you had no idea where you were when you got there, did you? You had some idea.
Well, we knew we were headed for New Guinea from the pilot was telling us.
No, when you first arrived on the troop ship.
Oh, no.
And then the pilot eventually, and this time back, you're back in New Guinea.
Yeah, we knew we were headed down.
And the name of that was Finchhaven, did you say?
Yeah, I think it's Finchaven. It's spelled a number of ways, but basically that's it.
Now, what happens next at Finchhaven?
Well, when we arrived at Finchhaven, once again we ended up in a replacement depot until they could find someplace to put us. And I ended up in an 90mm anti-aircraft outfit because these groups used exactly the same radar equipment that we had been trained on by the Coast Artillery. So I ended up at least using the same equipment that I'd been trained in.
Did you find that fortuitous? Was that from the time that captain came out and said there's nobody here that's going to be doing this? We
had no idea what was going to happen to us at all, and it was just you do what you're told to do, and that's the way of life.
So now you're at this replacement depot in New Guinea.
Yeah.
And is this anti-aircraft outfit, is that going to stay at New Guinea? What's going to happen?
No. We were there, I don't know, a number of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And then we got aboard an LST, a landing ship tank. They had put all the equipment, the guns, the trucks, everything aboard. And off we went again, and in a convoy. And I can't tell you how long this convoy lasted, but it was possibly 10 days. Stopping at Hollandia, New Guinea, and then all the way up to Manila in the Philippines. The war by this time was active on the island of Luzon. They had invaded Luzon and they were heading for Manila. And by the time we arrived in Manila at the beach, the war was winding up in Manila. It was pretty bad. Everything was still smoking, and there was a smell of death, and it was bad. But we were not there when there was active fighting. It had just ceased.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were 4 batteries in this battalion that I was associated with, and there were 4 guns in each battery, and they set us up around the perimeter of Manila to guard Manila against the Japanese planes. We were part of the anti-aircraft protection.
The folks you had trained with at Fort Monroe, they're still with you at this point?
No. We were scattered to the 4 winds. After that last replacement depot in Finchhaven, we went all directions. No idea where the others ended up.
Now they picked up everybody who'd been trained and sort of assigned. They may have assigned them. You don't know this, but at least you were assigned based on the skills that you had developed at Fort Monroe, and could use them with this anti-aircraft outfit, this anti-aircraft battalion. And then you convoyed to Manila, and you were one of 4. Did you say you were
one of 4? There were 4 batteries in a battalion.
Okay.
And there were 4 guns in a battery, and these are big guns. They're pretty good size contraptions, and I would work the radar set with a number of other guys, and the radar set would direct the guns about firing. So the radar set was in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and so you were spending an awful lot of time, in there on operations. You were either sleeping or you were working.
This is in Manila, in the outside area?
This is the outskirts of Manila, yeah.
And you were, what were your quarters like at this point? What did you stay in?
Well, we had tents until some time went by, and they were able to find some lumber, and we constructed more permanent quarters at that point. We had a tin roof building that held about 8 or 10 men.
The perimeter of Manila, where exactly were you? What was it called?
There's an island of Navotas, N-A-V-O-T-A-S, which is right along Manila Bay, just north of Manila.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is early 1945 by this point, do you?
Yes, it's January 45.
Okay. During this time, how long will you be assigned here to Navotas? How long were you?
Well, I was there basically until I headed home. We were in that same spot. We used it as our base. We moved off when we had to, but most of the time we spent there.
What were your days like in this battery at Navotas?
Well, you would spend some hours on the radar set, either operational or in maintenance. We had maintenance. We had a maintenance book that was about the size of a telephone book, and every day there were electrical maintenance tasks to be performed, and you were either sleeping or you were working. It was one or the other, 24 hours a day.
Did anything notable happen while you were working on the radar that jumps out at you? Anything that you recall during that time as far as operations or things that were going on in context with the guns?
Well, what used to happen was we were in contact with the Air Force, and if we picked up a contact on the radar set that was suspicious, or we didn't know whether they were friend or foe, we would contact the Air Force, and they would scramble a fighter or whatever they did. We didn't even know what they did half the time, because a lot of these contacts were far enough away that you couldn't see them with your naked eye. And there were things that used to happen that you were never sure how they ended up. Now, we would call in contacts, and the contact would sometimes go off the screen because it was out of range to us, but we never knew whether they were friends or foe. But there wasn't an awful lot that was exciting, because the Japanese Air Force was basically disseminated at that point. Not an awful lot. And as I mentioned to you one time, they started to use the guns now for another purpose. They used them to blast the caves up in northern Luzon, just to seal the Japanese in here. If they wouldn't surrender, they would try and get them to surrender, but it was very difficult. Most of the time they wouldn't surrender, so they had to do something with them, and they used the guns. They was to bore sight the guns on the caves, put in a shell, and just slam it shut and seal the caves up.
Now, when you say bore sight, what does that mean?
Well, you wouldn't need a radar set for anything like this. They would just line the gun up on the cave, open the breech, and you could see right through the barrel of the gun what you're aiming at. Mm-hmm. And you put the shell in, close the breech, and fire it, and head it right in there.
So they're using these anti-aircraft guns to fire right at the caves. Now, were the caves right near there? This is where you're at, right? This is where you're assigned?
This isn't at Navotas. We had to leave the site.
Okay.
We left the site with the guns, and we went to where this took place.
And you were, this is all because you were part of the same battery, is that?
Yeah, not all the radar people went. Sometimes they would go, and sometimes they'd stay back, but because they still had to operate the radar set. But it was pretty safe back there. I mean, after a certain point, there was no sign of any enemy aircraft coming around, so that they would send up the guns for that reason, not to utilize them.
They would send the guns up. And how far was Luzon from Navotas?
Well, Navotas is part of Luzon.
Oh, it is. Okay.
But the war was active. The Japanese were up in the hills in northern Luzon, and I can't tell you how far away it was, but it was probably 100 miles or so. Because I know it was above Clark Field, and Clark Field is about 60 miles from where we were. So they used to pull the guns all the way up there.
They would go up that way.
And then they would come back, and and they would send them up from time to time.
Just so I can be up on my geography, give me Luzon versus Manila. Tell me where all these places are. What are we describing when we
Well, the largest island in the Philippines is Luzon, and that's the northern island, the northern island, biggest one. And Manila is sort of at the southern end. The Manila Bay and Manila, and to get to Manila, you have to come in through a strait past Cavite. And if you recall, Cavite is where our Army troops ended up in the beginning of the war. They were originally in Manila, but they went all the way around through the Bataan Peninsula, and Cavite is a big rock at the mouth of Manila Bay. It protects Manila Bay, and that's where all our MacArthur and all our crowd ended up before they had to surrender. And MacArthur left from there to go to Australia. But so you'd have to come in past Cavite into this big body of water, which is Manila Bay at this side, and then all the island north of that. And the Japanese were up at the northern end of the island because it was more rugged country up there, the mountainous country.
You've mentioned before about your health during this time. What happened?
Well, when I was in Leyte, I got some kind of a high fever. I don't know what it was, but bad, the kind of fever that knocks you out. And I went to a sick call, and they gave me a little envelope full of sulfa pills. They say, take the sulfa and drink a lot of water. And that was it. Just drink a lot of water. And apparently they didn't have any hospital facilities for anyone but people that were getting hit and wounded in the war itself, which was going on up in the hills there. So you have to be in pretty bad shape to get any attention over and above that. And a lot of guys were getting sick. There seemed to be a lot of tropical kind of diseases over there. And it seemed to me that our people didn't know too much about handling them.
It was a new phrase. So you had the sulfa pills and were told essentially to go bomb back to your unit.
Yeah.
Did you
sweat it out.
You sweated it out.
Sweat it out.
You felt better at some point.
At some point, yeah. At some point.
Was that really the only thing that hit you, that impacted you during your actual deployment when you were there?
Yeah. We had to take Atiburn tablets every day. I'm not sure what the Atiburn did, except that you turned yellow as a chicken's foot, you know, that kind of yellow. And I don't know whether it kept you from getting malaria or it alleviated the feeling that you had with malaria. I'm not too sure, because I never felt as though I had malaria when I was there, but I sure felt like I had it on a number of times after I got home. A number of times. It took a couple of years, really. I would say 4 or 5 years before it seemed to dissipate.
After that, you haven't been bothered by that,
No,
by
no.
that since.
No.
And we take a step back. You actually accompanied the big guns up to the on that trip. It was about maybe a 60-mile trip. Did you
I think it was more than that. It was probably 120 miles. Anyhow, I think 60 miles is about the distance of Clark Field, and this was way above Clark Field.
You would take the guns. Would they transport them up on a truck? On a was it by train?
No, by the truck.
By truck.
But I can't recall whether they were they weren't self-propelled, but they had some kind of a base that they could pull them on, a wheel base, I believe.
Oh, okay.
As I recall, that's the way it worked. Yeah.
And when they were bore sighting these guns, and did you have any responsibilities?
No, that the gun crew, that was their responsibility.
You were there for that.
I was just in support. So.
In 1945, as the war began to wind down and became war. In 1945, as the war began to wind down and became war, what was life like there between then and the end of the victory over Japan? What was that like in 1945?
Very, very boring, very tedious.
Okay.
We had a long time where there wasn't an awful lot to do. They kept trying to keep us busy, trying to set up different school programs, trying to organize us in sports of different kinds. But really there wasn't much to do. It was not pleasant. You had a lot of time on your hands.
Mm-hmm. This is basically back at Navotas?
Yes.
Okay. Now, where were you when the atomic bomb went off? What do you remember about that?
Well, I'm not too sure where I was then. But anyhow, it had to be in Navotas there. But all I can remember is when the war was over, when the Japanese surrendered, we were having some kind of a social affair. You know, it must have been either a Friday or Saturday night or something. And they were trying to organize a dance right within our mess hall. A social affair of some kind. And somebody got up on a table and they made the announcements. They just got the word that the Japanese... We knew by this time that there was an atomic bomb dropped, but we didn't know what that meant, really. Someone got up on a table and they announced that the war was over, the Japanese had surrendered, and we had these 4 big guns within 100 yards away of this building. And one of the guys from the gun crew, he went out and he put one of these, a shell in the gun and fired